2024 will be an election year full of nonstop lying. That will challenge the public's ability to discern the truth like never before, with political misinformation and disinformation threatening the U.S. system of government itself. That is the dire warning from our next two guests. Joining us now, research fellow at Boston University, Lee McIntyre. He's the author of the book entitled On Disinformation, How to Fight for Truth and Protect Democracy. And MIT professor of political science, Adam Berinsky. He's the author of Political Rumors, Why We Accept Misinformation and How to Fight It. They both recently were a part of the Association of University Presses, a week-long celebration of the important work that university presses do in ensuring academic excellence and disseminating knowledge throughout the world. Knowledge based on facts, of course. Lee, I'll start with you. How bad is it going to get?
Well, I think it's going to get pretty bad. I think it's already been pretty bad. Disinformation has been a part of political campaigns for a while, but it seems to be ramping up. One of the problems is that people don't know that it's going on.
Adam, go ahead, Mika.
Oh, I was just going to follow up with how do they, you say people don't know what's even going on. I mean, I'm seeing it all over the place. I can discern. I worry about the next and the next generation. So what exactly are you talking about when you say people don't even know what's happening?
Well, I think this is an important thing. I think that we always have to relentlessly draw the distinction between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is an accident, but disinformation is a lie. And sometimes I see a lot of journalists, a lot of other folks using the term misinformation as a sort of a euphemism. Because, it sounds like that, well, if you don't know that it was intentional, maybe it's not. But disinformation is intentional. And once you know that something's disinformation, I think it's important to report on it that way, because if there's a lie, there has to be a liar. And then you have to do the work of exposing the plot. Disinformation is not an accident. It's a strategic denialist campaign, which was really borrowed from 70 years of science denial about climate change, about anti-vax, way back to the tobacco companies worrying about the link between smoking and lung cancer in the 50s. This has all been done before the roadmap has been there. What's recent is that denialist roadmap was picked up by politicians who discovered that they can use it not just for science denial, but for reality denial. That's disinformation, and it's extremely dangerous.
So, Adam, disinformation and misinformation, both real worries in the political landscape as we head into an election year, and both obviously spread like wildfire on social media. And yet, right now, we're seeing some of these social media companies roll back some of the protections they put in place after 2016, after 2020. Twitter, X, Elon Musk, it's impossible to know what's real and what's not there these days. And we've seen Facebook, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, roll back some of their protections as well. How deeply concerned are you about that?
Yeah, so I should say off the bat, I've done work for Facebook and for Twitter when it was Twitter, and Google as well. And so I think the important thing to remember is that there's people at tech companies who do really care about this. And so I think that there's been a lot of stories about how some of these guardrails are put into place or rolled back. I think that there's still a lot in place there. But I think a really tricky thing is that as the media has become politicized and fact-checking has become politicized, that you have a lot of Republicans who don't trust fact-checkers. So it becomes very difficult to have an external referee of sorts to say this is true and this is false, and to have everyone believe that. So I think that's really the larger issue, is that there is this climate of distrust, and the notion that experts can come in and say, this is supported, this is not supported, here's what's true and here what isn't, and that the American public just believes that is something that is not the case, and that's really tricky.
Lee, on that point, How do you deal with the political contest in 24, where one of the candidates we presume will be Donald Trump, whose whole campaign is based on misinformation, saying he really won in 20, saying that he's a martyr and a victim of the judicial system, he really did no wrong? And how do you counter that without looking like you're just being partisan political supporting Biden on the other side, but that you're really trying to get people to deal with what is true and make their decisions based on truth, not based on whatever side they're on, when one side is clearly going to run on misinformation?
Well, again, I think that's disinformation because it's intentional. And I think one thing to try to do is to point out that it is intentional. And remember that the point of disinformation is not just to get you to believe a falsehood, it's to polarize you, to erode your trust in other people. Disinformation is at some level really about team building. So what Trump is trying to do is to build this enormous army of people who will believe anything that he says. But remember that he's also polarizing the folks on the other side because he's trying to convince them that, there's no reason for you to talk to anybody who disagrees with you. There's no reason to call it out. And if you do, you're politically biased. People are in the media in particular are particularly allergic to the idea of being accused of political bias. But that's another disinformation tactic, right? They want you to feel that way. They want you to be worried of those sorts of accusations so you don't call it out as a lie. I think the only way to fight disinformation is to expose the plot, who's behind it, who has something to gain by the lie, and then just to relentlessly report what the facts are. I look at the journalists who are used to interviewing political dictators, when they interview Gaddafi, when they interview Saddam Hussein. I think that's the kind of way that you would have to interview Trump. You have to understand he's going to lie, he's going to misuse it, and I think there's no benefit for using the word misinformation when what we mean is disinformation. If it's an intentional lie, we have to call it out as such.
Adam, you write a bit about the power of Republicans